right, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am Nathan Rodall here with Dr. Ryan Dudenbostel.
Hello.
We are going to talk about a number of things today. If you watched my earlier podcast with Dr. Tigran Arakelian, this is going to be kind of similar to that. We don't have a real structured plan. We're just going to give a go of it and see what comes up. But Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself. Welcome.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Nathan. I'm the Director of Orchestral Studies at Western Washington University. This is my 6th year there. I was a doctoral student at UCLA prior to that, and before moving to Los Angeles, I worked as a staff conductor at the Manhattan School of Music.
Now, I don't know if you remember this, but while I was student teaching in Redmond, we actually had you come out and do the honor orchestra that
Oh
year.
my gosh, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. I remember meeting you now.
Huh.
Yes. Okay. Thanks for refreshing me. And then we worked together at Bainbridge Island.
Yes.
Honor Orchestra a couple of years ago with Tigran. Right.
Who I just interviewed a couple hours ago.
Amazing. Small world.
Well, this whole podcasting thing, I always wanted to put something together just to try and make the study of classical music a little more interesting.
Sure.
Maybe think about a music history podcast. How do you make that fun? Because if you can get people to understand music, they'll maybe appreciate it. The same way that, we as people who love symphonic music still have a hard time with people like Stockhausen. But
speak for yourself.
or Steve. I mean, I love Steve Reich, but kind of in the way that hitting yourself in the head with a hammer can be kind of, pedantic but freeing. But when you explain the academics of it and why it's interesting and why it works and why that kind of music was written, whether you like the way it sounds, you can gain an appreciation for listening to it as an audience member. Or
Sure.
the really weird stuff out there where you got Dr. Applebaum, I forget his first name, somewhere in California, and he made a piece where it's for a blind individual in a kitchen, and he's got like knives and drills and all these vegetables, and the piece is just him chopping up vegetables and drilling through cookbooks. But when you understand what he's trying to do, that it's not a Haydn symphony. It's not in this beautiful sonata allegro form. It's something different and something to be appreciated in its own separate category.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the way to approach any piece is that it's by a person who's trying to work out some particular problem or answer some particular question. Yeah. And the questions for Haydn and Beethoven and Schubert and Tchaikovsky and everyone who is writing in that common practice style were different than the questions that we deal with in the post-nuclear age, the post-Cold War age, the post-Holocaust age, the internet age. The things that we deal with and the things that keep us up at night are different. Yep. And the vocabulary that we have to talk about those things is different. So I think the first place to start is, well, who is this person? And what are they trying to work through? And to remember that every piece of music is by a person. Someone who felt strongly enough about whatever question they were grappling with that they needed to share it in one way or another, either on paper in a conventional way, or if they're an electronic musician, through whatever medium that they're expressing their music in.
Well, that's a good segue to kind of what we're dealing with right now globally in the world, is that art only exists if there's people to consume it. Our music only works if there's people to hear it.
Right.
So how do we deal with all of these cancellations going on? How do we, I've been talking a lot in these podcasts about how do we keep our identity as musicians without a performing ensemble? What do we do? Where are we at?
Yeah, I wish I could just say, well, Nathan, this is what you do. I think the fact that this crisis doesn't have a clear endpoint is probably the scariest part about it. I've had a lot of work canceled through the summer. I'm hopeful that the fall will be normal-ish, but it's hard to say. And even if we are able to be back in sort of normal operations in terms of being close to one another and being able to meet in large groups and have concerts where an audience comes, it's not a certain future in terms of the funding of those things, because as you and I know, the arts are very expensive.
Yeah.
And for professional organizations who rely on ticket sales are a tiny fraction of their budget. It's mostly through philanthropy and grants, and with the markets performing as they are, and people being really careful with their resources, the future is uncertain.
Well, I was talking about, I used to work as a cantor in a Catholic church in Des Moines. And the priest that I worked for posted the other day on Facebook, the economy will always recover. Grandma won't. You know, so as bad as things look and as many concerts as we have to cancel, if it means that when we get out of this thing, that our audience members are still well enough to come to our concerts, it will have been worth it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not questioning the strategy of our leadership. This is absolutely what we need to be doing right now. I think too, you know, when you look back at a lot of old crises throughout history, there are some institutions that make it through and some that don't. And this might be an extinction phase for some dinosaur institutions that have been resistant to change, resistant to adaptation, and create some new niches for kinds of artistic institutions that haven't been able to have enough sunlight to really grow. So I can see a bright future for organizations that are more embracing of diverse audiences and more open to a diverse audience experience, and whether that is clapping whenever you want, or wearing whatever you want, or coming in late to a performance, or leaving early because you have to relieve the babysitter. Like, there's all kinds of things that in classical music scare audiences away.
Yes.
And they're legitimately scared. Because I mean, you and I have been in concerts where someone has clapped at the wrong time and a bunch of people turn around and look at them. And you know that person is never going to come back because they were shamed for just not knowing something. And those rules are kind of silly anyway. They're arbitrary. Absolutely. So I think it's a scary time, but it's also an opportunity to look at, kind of like you say, the economy will come back, grandma won't. That if grandma's still there must be a way to reach her. Yeah. And we just have to be more creative about how we do that until things normalize, if they ever do, whatever the new normal becomes.
In my discussion earlier with Tigran, we were talking about children's concerts and how symphony orchestras and university ensembles, which you'll be able to speak to, typically when they address kids, it's like this quarantined, if you'll pardon the pun, concert that it's got like one of two things, Peter and the Wolf or A Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, and maybe a Leroy Anderson tune, and people come out in costumes, or it's usually a Halloween concert in my experience.
Sure.
And it's kind of, this is the one concert for you, here is your treat, we'll see you next year. When it really could be more of an invitation to the full show. And to do that, we'd have to change the modality in which we do these concerts, like you're saying. Maybe loosening up our rules about how late can you come in. If you need to go to the bathroom, you can get back in. I mean, be polite, don't make a huge fuss coming back in.
Yeah.
But challenging those conventions so that we can reach audiences. And when we do a concert for children, that it's, here, you've heard the fourth movement of the Hofner Symphony. Now come back Tuesday night, you can hear the whole thing. We have a violinist doing a concerto, and this is how a concert works. This is your small taste. But this isn't just your corner that we're going to shove you into and say, come back next time.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And I think expanding the term children's concerts to family concerts is the first step in that, because it's as much for the parents as it is for the children. Parents who might not integrate classical music into their life, but they see it as a valuable part of their kids' experience. And we do a family program every year at Western at some point in the year. And the way we structure it is we do maybe like a 45-minute program during the day where kids come, they get bussed in from school. And then we repeat that program with a few other pieces in the evening for families.
Yeah.
At a really discounted price. And it's just a big party, and it's always really fun and funny.
And having the kids see the full group.
Yeah.
Usually when I was a kid, the Northwest Sinfonietta would come to the elementary schools. It was just a quartet. Christoph Schanyard was there. He's great. He does a great job of explaining the repertoire, but it was still kind of that kids meal version of a concert.
Right. And it's the full forces that really blow the kids away.
Oh yeah, they got to see the full Mac Daddy, and if you can use an organ too, maybe throw a little Saint-Saëns organ symphony in there. Really get them hooked.
Yeah, our last children's family concert was all movie music, and we did the last 10 minutes of E.T. with the film.
Yeah,
and no one in that room had ever experienced anything like that before. I mean, even if you know the movie,
watching the movie,
but to be there live. And to watch a 10-minute scene with almost no dialogue that's entirely carried by the visual and by the music.
Well, I'm very really encouraged by the work in digital media of pairing up, like the planets is a common one right now. Doing Holst the Planets and having all of the new images of the planets that we've recently obtained up on the big screen while you're listening to it. And like we were talking about with the more modern, eclectic music, if you can wrap your mind around what it's supposed to be in the moment, you can appreciate it whether or not you like that particular movement. Some kids might think Saturn is a really boring movement in the planets, but if they have this huge sphere that is Saturn up in front of them, and maybe they understand why Holst chose to write it, in the way that he did, instead of just going right to sleep because this is the boring movement, and then you get back to Uranus and now it's fun again.
Right, and it's identical with adults. Adults get bored when they don't understand what they're listening to also.
That great video of the lady who falls asleep in the middle of Firebird. And she wakes up with a scream.
Right,
great.
Right.
You were saying?
Yeah. Oh, I was just saying, I think what's really important is that we take nothing for granted in terms of what our audiences know about pieces, even the pieces that we've known since we were kids. It is the first hearing for a lot of audience members, and you just have to give them a little something to grab onto, something to listen for, something that you personally think is cool about the piece, or is challenging, or is interesting, or is a question you're still grappling with the piece, and then they feel like, wow, I could. But they're kind of like when you read a novel, we have control over the reading. We're not being read to. If they attend a concert, they know something about what they're hearing. They feel like they're empowered in their listening. Your video just froze, Nathan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You cut out for just a hot second there.
Yeah, you cut out. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
What I said was absolutely brilliant and unrepeatable.
I heard most of it. So to backtrack to a point where I know that you heard what I heard and I heard.
Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, you're just kind of cutting in and out.
Okay, so there's no challenge. I think we can agree in.
Now we're back.
Putting together a concert that people will enjoy hearing, like movie music, for example. How are we doing?
Now I can hear you. So we can agree, and then I couldn't hear you anymore.
We can agree that it's easy to put on a concert that people enjoy hearing.
Yes.
Like you do the movie music, E.T., maybe you can get piecemeal with some of the more exciting symphonic repertoire, but the real challenge is in joining the fun music with the rest of symphonic repertoire. If there is a trajectory of Star Wars to Haydn 104, maybe the route that we get there is some of the newer music that's really exciting. It kind of sounds like the movie music, but was written for the concert hall. Off the top of my head, Jennifer Higdon's Blue Cathedral is really kind of episodic, and you could put something visual with it. I don't know what that would look like, and it has a pretty rich history that it was written for, I think, her deceased brother. to
that sounds right.
Yeah. So that could maybe be the connective tissue to get you from the movie music to, the powdered wigs. And not maybe part of this change is that we don't do the powdered wig so much.
Well, that's interesting. I think the powdered wigs have a lot to say still.
Absolutely.
It's just they don't have the only thing to say. And I think we have to present that music in context that this is a time of scientific and intellectual discovery where anyone with a basic amount of literacy had the cutting edge tools to discover anything in any field of science. Ben Franklin could go out with the kite and the key and make a major discovery, or and check on the two plants that you cross-pollinated and make a major discovery in genetics. Yes. And this kind of thing was happening everywhere, and it's infused in the music, this joy of discovery and kind of pre-industrial control over the world. I think if you present that music in that way, anyone in our modern audience could understand and can hear that, can hear the joy of creation and especially in Haydn, his own celebration of his cleverness.
Yeah.
And it's fun.
Himself in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's more, it doesn't feel boring that way. It feels fresh and it feels inventive. And I think the same thing with like heroic period Beethoven, if you talk about Napoleon and the tide turning in the revolution and him getting kicked out of Vienna and moved back. And then you hear all this celebratory music.
We just got to pay Benjamin Zander to come out to every symphonic performance ever and get everybody hyped up before we start.
I think we can do that. I think every one of us has not only the capability to do that, but the duty, the responsibility to do that.
Well, and the growth mindset from the marketing perspective of symphony orchestra is if we could just get listenership from 3% of all people to 4%, that would be great.
It would.
Well, why not make it 100?
Well, you have to start with 4 and then go through 5.
Well, but if the assumption is that we just need a couple more people, but there is the capacity for everybody to appreciate classical music in the right circumstances, why are we going to keep doing things exactly the way we do them and just maybe make a new advertising campaign to get more people to show up to the concert? I think what we were talking about earlier about changing convention altogether is maybe a more effective strategy to bump it to 30 or 40 or maybe even 80.
Yeah, well, the larger the institution, the more resistant it is to change. And I think back to the beginning of our conversation, I think our current time may force some of that.
Yes,
just as a matter of survival.
That makes me think of the forced change. A lot of teachers out there who have resisted technology for many years and always just said, I'm not doing that. Well, you've got no option now. If you want to communicate with your students or your colleagues, this is the only format we have because letters just don't get sent quickly enough. Right.
Yeah, that's happening here too at the university level, and it's kind of funny and also kind of sad too.
I spent 3 hours trying to make an a cappella video the other day, and I gave up. I just couldn't get it to sync.
Yeah, it's much harder online for sure. But back to your other question, I mean, if we want 100% of people coming to live performances, we need that requires a lot of venues, a lot of venues and a lot of musicians.
Yeah.
I think too, our culture is not comfortable so much with long form focused art. Although sometimes I question that because we watch long movies and we don't have a problem with that.
Precisely.
But sort of thinking this through and contradicting myself as I go. I was about to say, but the long movies have cues to remind you what has happened, but music does too. I think in a quest for expanded audiences, a lot of orchestras, professional orchestras, apologize for the length of pieces. And you see, like the New York Philharmonic does rush hour concerts, which are cool, and that's a really great thing. And they do all kinds of programming. But being afraid that your audiences don't have the patience for a long piece means that you're feeding them less sophisticated work. And they know that. Even if they don't know they know that, they still do. They're not gripping onto it because the food isn't as good, right?
Yeah.
Even if they don't know what they're missing, they know their itch isn't being scratched, like it would with an hour and a half Mahler symphony. And it's a different animal. And I think what we have to do is, instead of changing the animal, we change the zoo exhibit.
Yeah.
So that the audiences can come in and experience this music, which is great and which is eternally relevant and eternally accessible, but the context has to be welcoming and comfortable.
Well,
to our culture.
In our own backyard, the Northwest Mahler Festival, I think that that's the corner of our world where Mahler is going to happen every year. If you want to find some Mahler, it happens there, and come prepared. But everybody walks in knowing this is going to be a long show. Yeah. You're going to hear Mahler. And in that way, the audience has time to prepare for this concert, to maybe get some backstory if they want it. And that organization could maybe do more to prepare and widen the audience, not just to people who already love Mahler, but to people who, as Benjamin Zander would say, just don't know that they love Mahler yet. Right. And in the concert hall, make it more accessible throughout your regular concert series, but then keep those special corners just for that thing that you got to prepare ears for, or do some education. That we're kind of coming back to this again and again and again. If you know what your ears are about to hear and what your eyes are going to see, then it's not like the movie with no cues. It's not like Interstellar or something like where you're just floating in space for 3 hours. Yeah. You've been prepared and you know what's coming next and you know why it's significant. Because even something like the Eroica Symphony by Beethoven, if you've listened to a lot of Beethoven or you think all classical music is the same, if you understand the history of why he wrote it and that it was written during the Napoleonic period and the anecdote of him crossing out the dedication to Napoleon, that could maybe get you a little more intrigued than just hearing another piece of very early, or maybe the first romantic piece, depending on how much you want to argue about that. Could give you some more context to earn investment with people that maybe don't like classical music all that much yet. Yeah. I don't know that I agree about putting special things in their special corners. I think that is kind of apology for them. Like Mahler is hard, so we won't make everyone listen to it. Or Steve Reich, the new music is hard, so it's difficult music. So only the initiated. What's that? Do we sneak it in amid other things like putting cheese sauce on broccoli? We unapologetically include it in diverse programming. Okay. And I say that with no irony or humor. I think if you pair unlike composers, they reveal all kinds of things about each other. Yes. All kinds of things about, like, these are two pieces of music, obviously, but they're so different, and their differences highlight what makes each one itself. Yeah. Music for 18 musicians is very different than the Eroica Symphony. And you get to know, well, what makes the Eroica by hearing something that's not that piece. Well, I was at a conducting workshop a couple years ago with Neil Varone, if you'll pardon the name drop. And we were talking about like our dream performances. And I would love to put the Vaughan Williams Songs of Travel on a concert with Walton's First Symphony. I think there's something about the Walton that has this travel aspect to it, and there's no rationale to back that up at all. I just think they would go really well together. Why not? Well, they're too long, and you need to get all of the reasons that I more or less just explained coming out of everybody else's mouths based on the established conventions that really keep the same 3% of people coming back for Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms.
Mm-hmm. I think you have to do what you find to be interesting. And if you feel that it's compelling, and you can tell people why you feel it's compelling, they'll be compelled too. I think that's a great program.
Yeah. I mean, you'd need something to open it. Maybe if we're going weird, the Sibelius Pajola's Daughter would be a great squeeze right in there. The horn players might be dead by the end of it, but that's fine.
Yeah. Well, you always lose a few along the way.
It's attrition.
Yeah. Right.
So to change tack here, current disaster on the side.
Nathan, I lost you.
Let's give it a minute. I can see
Let's
you
try
again. Are we okay?
Okay, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Great. So changing tack a little bit.
Yeah.
What the current disaster aside, what's something in classical music that gets you really excited?
There's a lot that gets me really excited. I love that I'm seeing more diverse voices in composition. Women, obviously, especially this year. This is a big year. And then from all over the world, and seeing their music be played not because they're women or because they're Vietnamese or South African, but because their music is really good. And I think this is a very slow evolution, but I think it's a really great step in that we're kind of going back to the idea of having little corners for things. Like, this is the women's concert. No, this is all music. And Jennifer Higdon's Blue Cathedral is a great pairing with, I don't know,
any number of
Sibelius 6. Yeah, any number of things. It's a great piece and should
Sibelius
be included.
6 is my favorite Sibelius, just for the record.
Oh.
It doesn't have a big bang at the end, but I think it's really beautifully written.
It is beautiful. Mine is 5. It's my favorite.
5's hard to compete with. It's a good one. I mean, the end. Although whoever wrote the music for Polar Express totally ripped off the last movement. I mean, the horn leaps. It's
beautiful.
Yeah. If I was a composer, I'd be tempted to rip it off as well. I think I lost you for a minute. Are we back now?
No, you did, but we're back now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I think that's really great, is that we're seeing, even just in tiny little glacial steps, the inclusion of more voices. I think that the internet has allowed artists to share things so easily, has removed a lot of barriers for composers. I think the orchestra world is the hardest for a composer to break into, because for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's orchestra concerts are expensive. They have a lot of people. We have a huge breadth of music to curate. And we're afraid of losing audiences. We when I say we, I mean people who have to have audiences and sell tickets. In academia, we're a lot more free. And I think we have a duty to be actively furthering the discourse as an academic orchestra. So our programming strategy is a little different. But I think that up and coming composers can share things really easily online is also a great thing, and something I'm excited about.
That was a big part of the conversation I had a couple days ago with Anna Edwards about underrepresented composers and musicians. Well, first, that we're not trying to replace the standard repertoire, just include more that hasn't been heard yet.
Right.
And totally lost my train of thought. I'll get back to it in just a hot minute. One of the things we discussed, there it is the access to audiences is why a lot of this music was never performed. Like if you are part of Les Six in Paris at the right moment and you've got the right white male friends, then your music gets played. But there's so many great composers throughout all of history whose music is just sitting on a shelf and it's just manuscript. It's never been made into parts. And how many graduate students that you know of that are searching desperately to find a topic that uncovers, new earth with every scoop. And, we end up hearing another dissertation about Shostakovich 7, as great as that symphony is, it's maybe show us something new altogether. There's so many composers laying dormant that are undiscovered and maybe have something new to say, not just in the corner of romantic symphonic repertoire, but something entirely their own altogether, outside of just, here's another person who wrote some music that kind of sounds like Brahms, but maybe there's a convention that is just waiting to be discovered there.
Sure. Yeah. And to your point, and to Hannah's, the digital availability of scores and recordings now makes it so much easier to have access and to see if you want to perform this piece, or if this piece, it was a good fit for your group, without having to buy it or somehow track down the score. You can just look at it. Yeah.
I think that was maybe the core of my point there, was that if you are somebody making music now and you want to share it with anybody, there's no, laissez club that you have to be in to share that with the world. And part of the challenging the symphonic convention, we're already seeing some good strides in digital media, the way that the Berlin Digital Concert Hall and the content that New World Symphony produces all the time. But how do we transition that, which right now is just a video version of what you'd see if you were there in person, but we're still trying to convince people to pay for that. How do we make it something that is worth paying for, that's more than just like you were there sitting in the audience? Because that inherently is kind of boring, and I'd rather just buy the recording and listen to it while I'm driving. How do we make that digital concert experience something different than what you'd see in the concert hall and still worth paying for?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't think it's possible to make the digital experience anything close to what a live experience is, just because of
it's
the
not
way
even
digital.
worth trying.
Well, the way digital audio is processed, all the overtones are removed, and there's just nothing close to it, to what real acoustic sound is like. So I think that maybe I guess my answer would be to not try. To not try to replace that, but to try to make something that's different.
Well, Saliba Dake refused to make recordings for so long, and when you do listen to the recordings that are there, you understand what he was talking about. Is that the tempos and dynamics that you set are meant for the space that they're performed in. And if you make a recording, it's not the same piece of music. And people complain all the time his recordings are so slow. Well, you weren't there. You don't know what it sounded like.
Yeah. No, I agree. So I think if we look at the digital content as not being a replacement, but being like a lure, or enrichment, where we have interviews with the musicians, and then we hear them play.
And that's what Michael Tilson Thomas is doing with the New World Symphony, is that in all of the recordings they produce, because it's an ensemble for recent college graduates, that they're interviewing these people about their school experience, or how they like playing in the orchestra. Or you can, as a young and up-and-coming musician in high school or college, you can get a good feel for what the professional world is going to be like, how hard it is to maintain your practice and be, a working adult. And that's the kind of content that you could maybe convince people to pay for a digital concert experience.
Sure, yeah, and I think with Michael Tilson Thomas's Keeping Score series with San Francisco, it's similar. Yeah, fascinating integration of history and getting to know the musicians, and then actually hearing the piece that they're talking about in the end. I think that's a really nice package that's worth investing in, because it provides something that the concert experience doesn't. I think maybe that's the answer, is to say, well, what it's missing from live performance, and how do we give that, rather than saying, well, how do we put a live performance in a little box and make someone want to buy it?
And a good follow-up question to this is, at what point do we look at to what extent is classical music locked behind a paywall? And how do we continue to make that accessible to people that don't have the financial means to transport themselves to the nearest big city, pay for parking in the nearest big city, and then pay $40, $50, $100 for a ticket to a concert with music that they're maybe not very familiar with.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think the answer in our country is philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
I guess because we don't have really national funding for the arts at any large level. I think.
Well, maybe that's an answer in itself. There is maybe not necessarily the government or local governments, but if communities could just agree that the arts are something that we need for our community, for whatever rationale they have, to employ the best musicians they can find, and to put on concerts that are accessible to those people who are the least likely to access that kind of service. I was saying earlier, this time last year I was in Washington, D.C., and getting to just walk through the National Gallery, you stroll right in. What a treasure that is to the people who live close enough to get there. And if we could do something similar with the concert hall, where we still employ people that have gone to school for many years and put in a lot of effort to do that as a profession, but offer it to the public at no charge. Not that we can do that everywhere with every orchestra for every community, but I think we could make a decision to support that if we really wanted to. Every 10, 20 years, we give up our taxpayer dollars to build a sports stadium. I have nothing against competitive sports personally, but I can't say that I'd give up my hard-earned tax dollars to, renovate a multi-billion-dollar or multi-million-dollar sports stadium that I'm never going to, go to. Why not give a piece of that to a local orchestra that is something that I'm passionate about?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know that I have a response for that. It's a little bit above my pay grade. I think too that I think also we have to notice that there's music everywhere. Your students, sure, your concerts free. Here at Western, almost all of our concerts are free. And I think we have to broaden the idea of what music is available. That in the state of Washington, for example, there's more than just the Seattle Symphony.
Oh yes,
at least in Seattle. I mean, there's a dozen.
A community group.
I know or something in between. I mean, there are some really fine orchestras in Seattle that are not the Seattle Symphony, and that are doing all kinds of really wonderful programming. And that are more accessible.
To beef up one of my friends again, the stuff Anna Edwards is doing with the Seattle Collaborative Orchestra. If you want to hear a well-prepared concert that includes at least one underrepresented composer, and probably a piece of music that you've never heard before, maybe a piece of music that nobody's heard before, and that's where you can do it for much less the cost to go to Benaroya. As fabulous as an ensemble as the Seattle Symphony is. I mean, they won the gramophone competition last year. There's not a lot better than that.
No, they're wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful, but they're just not the only thing.
Yes.
They're not the only way to access music. Yeah, and I think we just have just the way we treat being a musician in this country. I think you see this like with the contest shows like The Voice and stuff. That if you're going to be a musician, you either have to be like recording artist level or too ashamed to share your music with anyone. And there's not this like gradation of, well, I love music and I just do it in my family, or I love music and I just do it at church, or I love music and I do it at church and I play in this community group, or I love music and I'm not good enough to be in a top level orchestra, but I play second violin in a regional orchestra and I make a pretty good living to it. That there's a spectrum of how to make music, and that music is for everyone.
Well, and the part of our current paradigm is that the orchestra is serving the audience. But at one of those tiers, the orchestra is serving the members, especially in a community orchestra where you loved playing in high school and college, you maybe took private lessons, you maybe had a scholarship through music to attend your university, but you didn't end up in the music field, and you still, need that fulfillment in an ensemble.
Right.
And so to some degree, we need to provide spaces for people to continue to experience music as performer, where the audience is just, bonus, but it's really about providing a space for the musicians.
Right. I mean, in a perfect world, it's both.
Yeah.
Yeah. That the audience is gratified and the musicians are gratified too.
Well, in any level, if the musicians are allowed by the organization and the conductor to experience music without fear of doing it wrong or hostile environments in classical music, that they can experience that at any level, that they enjoy playing with the people around them.
Right. Yeah,
well,
I agree. And that's worth something as an audience member to see musicians who might not be the most polished players having a great time. It's just wonderful. It's just the best. I would much rather see that actually than professional musicians who hate their work, because you hear it in the sound.
For the kids out there that want to know what we're talking about, just YouTube the Venezuelan Youth Orchestra.
The Simon Bolivar.
Simon Bolivar. Mm-hmm. And you want to look for the one where they're wearing the yellow, red, and blue jackets. And they're usually playing something that's, Latin to celebrate their heritage. And they stand up and dance around while they're playing. And the best ever recording of Bernstein's Mambo is by them. And there's people in the audience shouting and throwing things on stage, and it's fantastic.
Oh, it's amazing.
There's no better recording of that piece.
Right, it's electrifying.
They love it so much.
Yeah, right.
So on your side in academia and on my side in public education, how can we begin to cultivate those kinds of musical experiences just in our rehearsals? How can we start to do that?
It's something we talk about all the time with my students, about playing joyfully and embracing the privilege of playing music. And I think for our students, especially for mine, because they've been playing longer than yours have, it's something that they've always done. And they forget that it's not something that everybody does, that what they do is what most people cannot do.
Yes.
Either because they don't have the skill, they haven't acquired the skill, or more often because they don't have the privilege of having that opportunity to make one beautiful piece of art together as a large group. It's absolutely extraordinary. And that's something we talk about, and I have to remind my students, and sometimes I have to remind myself, all the time. And how wonderful it is to engage with music and make music together as a team. I think that's the first step. I think playing music that you believe in is also really important. I'm hesitant to judge pieces as being good or bad, but there are pieces that resonate with me and pieces that don't. And
that can change with time.
Absolutely, and it's more a reflection on me than it is on the piece. So if a piece doesn't resonate with me, I don't do it because I won't do it right. Yeah. Because I won't put enough of myself into it. And there are really famous, like, celebrated pieces that I don't quite connect with. Bruckner, for example, I don't have the maturity and patience for Bruckner, and so I could make it through
with so much.
Yeah, he said so little with so much, and I know there's magic in that, but I'm not ready.
I can get down with Bruckner every now and again. Just it becomes meditative, the way that things are repetitious, but not in like a Steve Reich kind of way. It is changing, it is evolving, but it takes a really specific flavor of focus that I don't always have.
Right. Yeah, and I don't always have, and I think you have to always have it to be able to do that kind of music. But that's just an example. So I think finding pieces that resonate with you, that you feel are strong statements and well assembled, and historically important in one way or another, and representative of a certain time and a certain way of thinking. It's easier. It's easier to sell them as a teacher, I think, if you really believe in it, and certainly as a conductor talking to an audience, if you really believe in the piece.
This is something I struggled with very much in college, and something that my violin teacher, Sven Ronning, was always trying to convince me, that the piece you're working on has to be your favorite piece of music, whatever it is. And I had a hard time jiving with that sometimes, because if it's the 9th time that I have played Mozart 40 in the past 5 years, there's nothing. I mean, there's definitely notes that I still haven't played right, but there's not anything emotionally new for me to experience in that music. So how, to the students who are in that situation, how do you get past that I don't want to play this song? And for the people who are programming music, the teachers and conductors, how do you become more sensitive to that sentiment within your ensemble?
Well, I think with high school and middle school students who probably feel more strongly about, I don't want to play that song, I think you give them a broad menu, and say, well, you do get to play this that I know you love. This piece you might not get yet. But you will, and here's why it's special, and here's why it's important, and here's why it makes that piece you love sound even better.
Okay.
The thing that I'm teaching you, subtly, without telling you that I'm teaching you, in this piece will make you play this other piece better. And here's why. I think all people, but especially students or young people, they'll respect the why. If you're just really honest about it, like, yeah, you might not be jiving with this, but it is great, and here's why, and here's how it will help other things, and in the meantime, here's the thing that I don't have to fight with you about. Here's the piece that we'll all have a good time with.
I always present it as you've got enough candy on your plate. It's time for some vegetables. You can't just eat candy all day.
But it's all candy. It's all candy. Just some is black licorice, right? And it's like, this is candy too, but you
just don't have a taste for it yet.
But it's weird, right? This is the popcorn jelly bean.
I love that.
Okay, it's all candy. There's no vegetables. So this goes back. Sorry, I feel very passionate about this. If I seem like I'm combative, this, like putting new music on a special concert or putting Mahler on a special concert. It's exactly the same thing. Apologizing for peace. Like, this isn't candy, it's broccoli. Well, broccoli's no fun. unless you describe broccoli as the delicious, incredible textured vegetable that it is. That this broccoli will make the prime rib that much more delicious because of the complement of flavors. That's kind of how I feel about it. I'm hungry.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's all candy. I like that. Welcome back, everybody. We had some technical difficulties and had to start over. I'm not sure whose internet it was, but with everybody on the internet these days, it could be just about anyone or everyone. So welcome back, Dr. Dudenbostel. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
Before we left, those of you watching the video, you were right there a couple seconds ago, but we got to catch up a little bit. Ryan, you were saying it's all candy. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that all music is great. And when we're talking to our students about the music we play, it can be dangerous to suggest that some pieces are the candy that they get to enjoy, and some pieces are the vegetables that they need to stay healthy. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier in the conversation about taking new music or taking Mahler
and shoving it in a corner.
And shoving it in a corner as like a specialty interest thing for those who are initiated and maybe unafraid of that thing. Telling a student, this is just my opinion, telling a student that this music is vegetables only makes them push harder against it, I think.
Mhm.
Better to say like, well, it's just a kind of candy you haven't tried yet. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this made it in the last video, but it's you know, black licorice is an acquired taste, but it's still candy.
Yes.
And it's just a matter of getting to know it well enough to discover how sweet it is.
Well, and I was about to mention one of the pieces that I was trying to put together for your festival at Western, but weeks before we even knew it was canceled, I took this piece off the program. It's the Arensky Variations on a Theme of Tchaikovsky.
Yeah.
The great piece of music, and is very approachable for your average high school orchestra if the cellos can read tenor clef, and if everybody is, what I was going to say is willing to eat the vegetables. And that was the wall that we came up against in class, was that it wasn't beyond our capability, but it was maybe beyond our ability to focus.
Sure.
Because each variation is not that long, maybe, 45 seconds at the most with the longer ones, but they each deal with something that's so specific and so focused that if you really give your attention to what the issue is in each variation, you're going to have 80% of your class sitting there doing nothing, which is, I hate.
Yeah.
If I find myself doing that for more than 3 rehearsals, I'm doing a different song, because we're not, if we can't all work on it together at the same time, we're not ready to do that kind of thing yet.
Sure.
And there's ways to get around that. I think I want to say it's variation 3. There's a cello bit and tenor clef that goes up really high. And so I wrote it out for all the parts in the octave that would work best for them, so we could all work on it together. But even that, the focus was so needlepoint. I think they just didn't have the taste for black licorice yet. And that's an important aspect as a conductor or a teacher when you're looking at your repertoire, is when to pull the plug and not having shame about it. If you could speak to that for a minute.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's we all hope that we're wise enough to pull the plug before we plug it in the first place.
Oh yeah.
But sometimes you really don't know.
Yeah.
And you have to weigh, I guess, in an educational setting, you have to weigh the morale cost of pulling a piece and what that communicates to the student, versus the cost, like the audience cost, or just the pain that everyone goes through in dragging everyone through the piece when they know they don't feel good about it. Everybody has a different perspective on it. I think sometimes it could be of real educational value to continue to work on something so that it sounds great in rehearsal setting. Once, like we got it once, and that proves that we can do it. Maybe it's not quite ready to share in concert. And then to pull it. I think at the end of the day, it's most important that the students leave the stage feeling proud of their work. And even if you have to pull a piece and revive a piece that you've done before earlier in the year, there's always more to work on.
Oh yes.
And I think there's no crime in saying, like, you know what, this piece we're just not quite ready for it. We're not quite at the level that this piece needs, but we will be someday, but today's not that day. But instead we're going to have a chapter 2 with this other piece where we left it at this one point. Let's talk about what was left unaccomplished the last time we performed it and see if we can achieve those things. And then it still feels like for the students that there's ground to be gained.
Well, and I am not unique in this philosophy, but it's in an educational setting, particularly at a public school, they need to be sight reading all the time. There needs to be something on the stand at least every week. For me, it's every 3 days. And if the kids haven't figured it out yet, it shouldn't be a secret that I don't know what we're going to play until 4 or 5 weeks before the concert, just because I gave you 10 different things and I'm not sure what's going to stick. I have my professional standards of the things that I want you to learn, but maybe G minor is coming along a little bit better than I thought fifth position would. And the song that's testing your ability to play in G minor is doing better. So that we're going to present the best possible performance we can. And I don't ever feel like I've pulled a piece. with that philosophy. It's just, I'll ask the kids, okay, what do you guys think is going well? Because they want to know what they're playing, because they would like to, focus in on and limit their practice time, be more efficient. You can offer it up to them, and the choice is obvious. Because if you've trained them to be good musicians, they know what isn't ready yet. And in the case of the Arensky, they loved so many of the different variations. They asked, can we just play, this, and this, but leave out. And I think we talked about this towards the beginning of the podcast of piecemealing different programs. And you were talking about, you got to put on the performance where you think everything goes together. And the sort of me reading between the lines is that the composers are being heard in what they meant to say.
Right. I think so.
And so from my perspective, I couldn't just piecemeal this very important piece of music to Arensky, because it was written somewhere around the time that we lost Tchaikovsky, and they had a somewhat close relationship. And to leave out one variation was like deleting memories of Tchaikovsky that Arensky was trying to communicate.
Yeah.
And so to that, I couldn't chunk that up.
Sure. Other pieces you might be able to. Other sets of variations maybe. Sure. Yeah, it's unique to the piece, and I think your approach of having a broad menu of pieces that are always in rotation is a good one for public school students when you're kind of the whole year is like kind of one big process rather than concert by concert by concert, and then when a performance is coming up, it's sort of like going to the farmer's market and say, well, what looks good today? What's fresh?
Yeah.
And we kind of put together our meal from that. And you're right, you never know what's going to stick, even with or what will be hard. Well, what you think is hard that isn't
someone
hard.
Who's new to the school that I'm at this year is I don't really know, because you want to ride that rail of challenging your students, but not putting them in a place where they're feeling discouraged.
Right. Yeah.
And so as soon as I meet that wall of disenchantment, of self-doubt, is I gently back away and pursue a different direction. But I imagine as you've put in time at Western, you kind of know, at least for a 2 or 3 year period, what you're working with for the most part, and got a good feeling of what can I put out there, and experience beyond just there at Western with adults or in previous academic experiences. You kind of know what's going to work and what's going to be more challenging.
I do, but it still is a learning process, and I'm surprised all the time. I am more surprised by what's easy, things that I thought would be a problem that aren't, than I am by what is hard. I've gotten better at judging that, I think, and judging the ability of my groups in terms of not over-programming for them. But again, that took some time too, because sometimes things on paper look more simple than they are in practice. And yeah, it's different because we are more on a seasonal model where we have guest artists coming in at certain times, and there's kind of a constellation to the year that has to be met. So the free flowing is not as easy, but there is some of that even so. And yeah, it's just a matter of, I think, of experience and getting to know who you have and also what you need to teach them. In the 4 years that you have them, so kind of rotating through, making sure that they've played at least 2 Beethoven symphonies and something by Brahms, and
or whatever your personal philosophy is. There's no one way to slice it. Like having a conversation with Anna Edwards, it's really important to her that at least one of the composers is still alive, and that one of them is from an underrepresented demographic. And if that's how you want to put a concert together, I think you can still meet all of the educational needs and still have that repertoire component be part of your recipe.
Of course. Yeah. You can. It's an admirable amount of work. And using that to do that, but yes.
Sorry. Using that as a transition, if I'm, say, a graduate student at a school with a large symphony orchestra that plays moderately well as you could expect students of the undergraduate age, what might be just a place to start when thinking about programming for a concert without knowing the time of year or the particular ensemble? How might you build a recipe without picking specific pieces?
I don't know that you could build a recipe without picking specific pieces. So let me just repeat the question. So you're a grad student, hypothetically, you're a grad student at this institution, and you're getting a shot at a concert with the orchestra there. Well, you probably only get one of these in your time, so it's probably your culminating recital. I think you need to be a little bit self-serving in thinking about, well, what's my next step, and what will give me good video footage for that next step. Where are my weak points in my, like, what's repertoire I've shied away from? What am I bad at as a conductor? I should probably do one of those pieces because I am here to learn. Something like that. What's something that I'm really good at that I can show off? If you have a research component to your degree, obviously something that's connected to your research. And then, there you go. I guess there's putting a menu together without picking specific pieces.
Limit it in such a way where you have to have an overture, a piece with a soloist, and a symphony. You wouldn't be that constricting?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, every degree program is different. Some will require that you commission a piece from a composition colleague, or do a concerto with another student colleague, or some combination of the two. No, I don't think so. I think you need to think about in a student conducting recital sort of situation. I think you need to be more selfish. That's the one time where I think a conductor has the right to be pretty self-serving, with guidance, of course, from their mentor. In programming.
Well, that's sort of the part we're missing here in this recipe, is that there would be some advisor here to say you can't do that. No.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe a way to wrap this up and put a bow on it is, if we're thinking about what would we suggest symphony orchestras and their boards and their conductors, if they're thinking about how do we get more people to the church of classical music, how might they restructure the way they think about repertoire when the standard is, overture, soloist, symphony? How might we restructure that so that everybody still gets a piece of black licorice, but they're more willing to eat it when they see it?
Sure. I think I think it has to be a question of not, an orchestra is not asking how do we get people to like what we offer, but how do we provide what people are looking for? The kind of experience people are looking for, because like we talked about earlier in the podcast, not every potential audience member even knows what they would like because they haven't been exposed to it. But we all have a pretty good idea of what kind of experience we would like. We all kind of know what a good time is for us. So I think that would be the place to start, is with some real soul searching of what is our concert experience like when we do a concert? What is that? What people want? Is that how today's people, most of today's people, want to spend an evening? And if they want to spend their evening doing something else, it would be worthwhile to think about, well, what is that other else? Like, what is at its essence? Like, obviously, we're not going to sit in front of the computer and watch Netflix. Like, that's not that's not the thing. But there's a more abstract itch that's scratching, and like, well, what is that, and how can we tailor our experience without sacrificing any of the musical content? How can we tailor that so that it meets the needs of today's audiences? And like we talked about before, apologizing for pieces or especially avoiding long pieces is I think really counterproductive, because we live in an era of quick sound bites and too long didn't read, and people are hungering for the long, slow, do nothing for a while experience. I just read an article today about how there's been this unexpected decrease in social anxiety related to our current quarantine, because people just have less going on and life is slower. And shockingly, even though times are tough, a lot of people are happier, and they don't think they should be, but they are. And so I think that's kind of telling of something that that we need to tap into as presenters of this kind of music.
Well, maybe then an assignment for anybody who happens to be watching this is to go over to the Berlin Digital Concert Hall, which is presently free, everything they've ever recorded on tape, and they've got some monumental performances.
Amazing.
How might I get into the right mindset to sit and experience one of these longer works, even if longer work to you is, all of Beethoven 3 all the way through? How might I get in the right mindset to receive that with excitement?
If you don't know the piece, it might be interesting to listen to the last minute or two. Because it's a video, you can watch at any point. Listen to the last minute or two, which is thrilling, and then go to the bathroom and get a snack and get a cozy place where you feel like you can sit for a little bit. And then knowing where you're going to end up, start at the beginning and see how you get there.
Okay. I love it. It's giving yourself a goal. It's like you're going out for a run and if whatever loop I take, I've got to end up back where I started, if that's where I parked or that's where I live. And you're not so sure what the path is, but you know where you've got to end up when you're through.
I would suggest that.
That's great. Well, I think that wraps this up. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on a recording here, but thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Nathan. Take care of yourself. Be well.
You too.